Okay, this is your pre-algebra end-of-year review. So what we're doing this week is we're really just wrapping up what we've learned in quarter 4 between chapter 10, our inequalities unit, and then our unit on polynomials and factoring. So this is a combination of quarter 4. If we had been in the classroom, this would have been a review of the entire year, your entire textbook plus the 2 additional units, and we would have had our end of course exam. So obviously, because we're in this online learning scenario, we're not going to do a whole year, but we're still going to end with some type of an end of year assessment. All right, so that's kind of the thinking behind what's in this PowerPoint today. So your quiz and test instructions are the same as they've been for the past couple tests. All right, so you guys were a lot better on this last test on submitting your scratch notes, your scratch work, and it's numbered. So you've got to do that because I cannot give you a grade, all right? So down here on the bottom, you will receive a 0 without work being submitted, okay? So that means it goes in my grade book as a 0 until I get your work. If you have to go back into your test after the deadline to do your work and you don't have work to send me, then I'm going to take a deduction. All right, so please don't make me ask you for it. All right, it just makes it really difficult on me. Just as soon as you hit that submit button on your test, I need you to send me your work. All right, don't get any outside help. If you have a tutor, tutors are not allowed to help you in a quiz and a test, okay? Homework is totally fine, but a quiz and a test, imagine if you were in the classroom taking a quiz or test for me, you would be taking it by yourself. All right, so that's the most important part of it, and you're still sending it to me on Remind, which should not be an issue at this point either. Okay, so what's going to be on your review assignment, quiz, and test? In this PowerPoint, I've covered all of the concepts on the 3 assignments. So they might all be on your review assignment, but not all of these questions would be on your quiz, or maybe not all of them would be on your test. But if I'm showing you the problem here, it means it's at least on one of the 3 assignments, if not all 3 assignments. Okay, so you will see these problems. So we're going to find volume. I've narrowed it down to we're only solving for volume on these assignments this week, but we're going to find volume of all 3 figures. So on the first one, finding volume of a cylinder, you have to identify that that's a cylinder. All right, you won't have your formulas, so it's important that you still have them memorized. Hopefully they're kind of tucked away in that long-term memory. Volume equals pi r squared h. Okay, so we take 3.14 for pi. We plug in our radius value, 3 squared times h. All right, and before I forget also, I want you to try to pause. You should have fill-in-the-blank notes printed from this assignment, so you should be taking notes with me. I want you to pause these problems because this is all review. I want you to try to work these problems before I explain it. All right, so that means I want you to do the cone like it's a homework assignment, right? I want you to solve for the volume of the cone and then play the video and see if I explain it the way that you solved it. That's the absolute best way for you to get something out of this lesson. All right, so we know that we do exponents first. So 3 squared is 9. 9 times 6 is 54. And 54 times 3.14 is 169.56. We found on Big Ideas a lot of times they call for rounding to the nearest 10. So if it's 169.56, that would round up to 169.6 meters cubed. Okay, now for the cone, it's just a different formula. So as long as you know your formulas, that really is the most difficult part. So it's literally the same formula as a cylinder, except you're taking 1/3 of it. Okay, now there is one difference with the cone though. We have 1/3. We have 3.14 for pi. But what's my radius? My radius is not 4. That's my diameter. So my radius is 2 squared. So if you were to plug in 4, your whole answer is going to be wrong at that point. And then multiply it by the height. So 2 squared is 4. 4 times 6 is 24. 24 times 3.14 is 75.36. So now you have 1/3 times 75.36. All right, and let me also remind you, this work is crucial on your quiz and your test. If you submit your work and you haven't shown work on how you solve for volume, I can't give you any points, even if you got the correct answer, because I'm not there with you while you're taking your test. How do I know that you did the work without you showing me? So that's why the work is so important. So now I have this 1/3. And if you guys remember back to this lesson, I told you when we're taking a fraction and multiplying it, that's like division. So now I'm going to take the 75.36 and I'm going to divide it by 3. So my volume of my cone is 25.12. If it tells me to round, so here's the part that's tough. If you put 25.12 in your answer and it said round to the 10th, it's going to mark it wrong. All right, now of course I go back and try to give you partial credit, but full credit, if they tell you to round to the 10th, is 25.1. All right, so now I have the sphere. Well, the sphere is just a different formula, 4/3 pi r to the 3rd power. Okay, so I'm just plugging these numbers into the formula. That's all that chapter 10 was about, was plugging numbers into your formula. So times 3.14 times the radius. Again, did they give me radius? No. Okay, so you need to cut that in half. 6 to the 3rd power. 6 to the 3rd power is 216. All right, so you're going to be allowed to use your calculators. That's something you can do. 6 times 6 times 6. You get 216. Okay, 216 times 3.14. Okay, equals 678. 4/3 times 678.24. Okay, so now if you remember back to the chapter 10 test review, I explained to you a good shortcut to multiplying by 4/3. So you want to take this number and first multiply it by 4. All right, so 678.24 times 4. Okay, you get 2,712.96, and then you divide by 3. All right, so when you're multiplying a whole number by a fraction, multiply it by the numerator, and then divide by the denominator. Divide by 3. All right, and you get 904.32. But again, round to the nearest tenth. If it's 3.2, then it's just 0.3, and we do yards cubed. Okay, all right, so those are our volume problems. And now let's talk about similar solids. With similar solids, ratios and proportions are so important. All right, so there's not just one way to set this up. You could set it up different ways. So you notice on both cone X and Y, you're given a radius and you're given a slant height. So when I'm setting up these ratios, I need to make sure I'm going in the same order. I can do radius over radius, 5/7, equals, I've got to start on the same cone, slant height over slant height, 13/L. And now I can do my cross products. And I get 5L equals 13 times 7, which is 91. Okay, now I'm just simply going to do my division. 91 divided by 5 gives me a slant height of 18.2 yards. Okay, so for these problems on your review, your quiz, your test, you've got to set up the proportion. You see how I did radius over radius equals slant height over slant height. As long as you do that, if it's length and width, you do length over length equals width over width. All right, and that's how you would solve it. Okay, so we're through chapter 10. That's all that will be on your final test, homework quiz test next week from chapter 10. Now let's talk about equations and inequalities. So we started off the inequalities unit solving equations. And these equations were multi-step, right? There was kind of a lot going on. In this equation, I have this side of the equation and this side. So before I do anything, before I start trying to solve for x, all right, what do you think you do first? Okay, so this is where I'd want you to pause the video. Go ahead and pause and see if you can work this equation. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is combine your like terms. Negative 2 plus 13 is positive 11x equals x minus 2. The second thing you want to do is get your variables on the same side of the equation. So if you remember what I taught you this year, we talked about finding the lower of the two values. Okay, so clearly 1x is less than 11x. So I'm going to subtract 1x to the left side of the equation. So I'm moving my x's to the left side. Well, if I'm moving my x's to the left side, that means I need to move my numbers to the right side. Okay, so I would subtract 8 over to the right side. That cancels these. 11 minus 1 is 10x equals, what's negative 2 minus 8? Negative 10. So I divide both sides by 10, and x equals negative 1. Okay? Remember, with equations, there's only one value that would make the equation true. If I plug this back in for all the x's, and I solve, both sides of the equation will equal each other. There's no other number that can make it true. There is one and only one solution to an equation. So now I get to inequalities. And on your final test, I'm going to focus on solving inequalities. I know in this unit we did real world situations, we did writing inequalities, but I really kind of cut that out of your last test, and I'm only going to focus on solving them. All right, but we also have to graph them as well. So what we notice, all right, I want you to pause it and see, okay, and see if you know how to solve it, okay? So the first thing you should notice is that this inequality is written backwards, okay? We don't like our symbol to come after the inequality because it makes it difficult to read. So I see that the symbol is closed off towards the x. So when I rewrite it, x plus 15, I need to make sure it's closed off towards the x still, all right, meaning less than. And then I put my 24 on the other side. So now I just solved the inequality. And the good news is you solve inequalities the same way you solve equations. Minus 15 from both sides. X is less than or equal to 9. Now, by now you're familiar with the big ideas graphs. Okay, they're going to have all these different graph options. They're going to have the number line already set up for you, which is nice. Okay, and they'll have these dotted options. They'll have like a closed dot. Okay, that's a compound inequality. You're not going to use any of those. Then over on the other side, they're going to have a closed dot with an arrow going right, closed dot with an arrow going left. They'll have an open dot both ways also. So what you need to do on big ideas is you need to select which one of these options would match your inequality solution. less than or equal to. Well, if you see the equal to bar, that means a closed dot. So it would be the closed dot option going left. So you would click that, then you would drag it or click it up to where the 9 is. And as soon as you click on that 9, it's going to put the less than or equal to symbol on your number line. Okay? It's very important that you do this on these assignments, because if you don't, it's going to mark your problems wrong. And without work, I can't give you any credit, even if you knew how to do it. All right? So it's really important that you're able to put these answers on your graph on the Big Ideas assignments. Okay, so I'm not going to go over these options again, but that's what you're going to see on every single one of these problems in the Big Ideas assignments, okay, is those options for graphing. So let's go to the next problem. All right, negative 3x is less than 12. What would you do to both sides to solve for x? All right, you would divide by negative 3. Simple enough. But I have a rule with inequalities. If I have a negative number connected by multiplication or division, which it was, what do I need to do to my inequality? I've got to flip it, right? So now it's not less than, but it's greater than negative 4. It's so important because that's going to impact how you graph your answer. So now it's going to be an open dot on negative 4, but it's greater than. The arrow is going right. Okay, so definitely that's on your homework, that's on your quiz, that's on your test. Okay, catch those negatives. All right, multi-step. You've got some multi-step coming up on these assignments. We solve them just like equations though. We always do our addition and subtraction first. So what I want you to do, and this will help speed up the video as well, so I want you to pause and I want you to solve and graph both of these. Go ahead and pause, solve, and graph. It'll be quicker for you to keep up with me as well. Okay, so in the first problem, we subtract 5 first from both sides. 3m is greater than 15, and divide both sides by 3. All right, pretty straightforward. M is greater than 5. If I am moving too fast, or if you're still writing, make sure you pause. You can pause the video at any time. Okay, so 5 is my solution. And I have a 4 and a 6, an open dot with my arrow going right. So remember, you would select this option down in your Big Ideas graphing toolbar, and then you would click on the 5 to put in your number line. Okay, so next equation is written backwards. Did you rewrite it? Negative 2b minus 10 is greater than or equal to, because you see how it's open towards that side, 20. So now I add 10 to both sides. Oh, this one gets a little tricky, because now I divide by negative 2. What happens when you divide by a negative? You have to reverse your inequality. And that completely changes the direction of your graph. So now when you graph your solution, it's a closed dot, but now your arrow goes left. Okay? And just as another reminder, these types of problems were taken straight from your Algebra 1 book that you will be starting next year with Ms. Johnson. So you're really getting a head start on what you're going to be learning next year. All right, so now we have compound inequalities. If you remember back to this lesson, we have and statements and we have or statements. And means they're connected, or means they're split. All right, so is this an and statement or an or statement? Okay, so it's and because x is connected to both sides. So whatever I have to do to the middle to get x by itself, I must do to each side of the compound inequality. So negative 3 cancels out in the middle, which is great. This is negative 6, negative 4, and then I have my x. But because I had to divide by a negative, okay, that means I have to reverse my inequalities. So I'm going to switch my inequality symbols. It was greater than, and now it's going to be less than. It was greater than, now it's going to be less than or equal to. All right, so how I read it is that all solutions are greater than negative 6. Oh, positive 4. But less than or equal to positive 4, because negative divided by negative is a positive. Okay, so now I'm ready to graph. All right, let me just erase these arrows. Okay, remember when I graph a compound inequality, it's going to have boundary values. So on your big ideas assignment, that's where you're going to use the closed dot options. Maybe one side's open, the other side's closed. Maybe both sides are open. Okay, or which one am I missing? The closed dot and then the open dot on the other side. All right, so here's what it's going to look like on your big ideas number line options. Okay, so you have negative 6 down here and positive 4 up here. All right, so your inequality symbols tell you if it's supposed to be an open dot or a closed dot. All right, so clearly I need an open dot on the left and a closed dot on the right. All right, so open dot and closed dot. And then all the acceptable solutions happen in between. So that's why we have this thicker line that connects them. All right, now, obviously the number line's already there, but for purposes here, let's just put in a random number that occurs in that range of values. So what I'm saying is that 0 is a value that would make this compound inequality true. If you can understand that, you really understand what we're doing here. We're saying there's a range of values that would make the compound inequality true. It could be 0, could be 1, 2, 3, okay, any one of those values. All right, so that's my and statement. Okay, so on the or statement, each equation or inequality is separate. All right, on this first one, it's written backwards, so we don't like that. Let's rewrite it. It was closed off towards the x. It's still closed off towards the side with the x. All right, so just make sure you do that. We subtract 2 from both sides, and x is less than negative 12. Okay, simple enough. Now on this side, we just solve for x, and x is greater than or equal to 10. All right, so there's my or statement. Okay, so that's what you would put in your answer, but now we have to graph it. We still have our boundary values, okay, so 1 point needs to go on negative 12, and 1 point needs to go on positive 10. Okay, but here's where you're not going to select the compound choices. You're going to select an open dot going left, okay? So, and you're going to plot that on your negative 12. Remember, or statements, when they're graphed, the solutions go in opposite directions. So an open dot on negative 12 and a closed dot, because it's equal to, on positive 10, and it's greater. So my arrow is going to the right. So now what an or statement says is anything in here, this is like no man's land. It's not a solution to either inequality. So those are the solutions that would not be possible here. Because as long as it's one or the other, then it makes the or statement true. All right, so there's your compound inequalities. All right, so let's get into this last leg here of our final review, and that's adding and subtracting polynomials. Now remember, with adding and subtracting, that's like terms, meaning the exponent or your degree has to be the same. Okay, so here I have negative 5x squared. So in the second grouping, I'm looking for a term that also has x squared. Do you see one? Okay, yes, you do. All right, so you're going to pair up negative 5x squared with positive 10x squared. This would be work that I would want to see on your test, okay, where you're grouping your like terms together. Remember, plus always goes in between. Plus what? Negative 5x. Are there any terms with just an x in the second set? Yes, there are. Minus 6x. Okay? And then I have the plus 8, okay, because I have no other numbers by themselves. So now I can combine like terms here. What does that mean? That means add the coefficients. Negative 5 plus 10 is positive 5x squared. So as long as they're like terms, I just add or subtract my coefficients. So here, what's negative 5 minus 6? It's negative 11x plus 8. And if you do it in this order, then your final answer is already written in standard form. Remember, standard form is descending by degree. We start with x squared, and we move our way down, and our numbers are by themselves at the end. All right, so now let's do the second one. Now, the second one is subtraction. So before we do anything, we need to change these signs. Remember, nothing in the first set changes though. Nothing at all changes in the first set. We just rewrite it. But now instead of minus, it needs to be plus. And then we reverse all the signs. Okay, it's plus negative g squared plus 14. All right, now I'm ready to combine like terms. Is there anything that's similar to g to the third? Nope. So it's just g to the third. Anything similar to negative g squared? Nope. So I just bring it down, negative g squared. What about negative 8g? Do you see any other g's? Nope. Minus 8g. Now what about your numbers? Can you do 8 plus 14? Sure. So combine those to get 22. And that's it. Okay, so on this one, there really wasn't a whole lot to combine because they weren't like terms. These are not like terms. You say, well, they all have a g. That doesn't matter. They don't have the same exponent, so they're not like terms. All right, nearing the finish line, guys. Multiplying polynomials. When I multiply polynomials, and on these assignments this week, I did not really include the distributive property option because really FOIL is the way that you're going to want to go. And remember, FOIL is first, outside, inside, last. First, outside, inside, last. So that means I multiply my first terms. But this goes back to product of powers property. If I do x times x, same base, I add the understood exponents of 1. And I get x squared. Okay, so that's how I did x times x equals x squared. Okay, now I do my outside terms. X times 3x, x times 3 is 3x. Now I multiply my inside terms, that's my I, negative 6x. Now I do my last terms, negative 18. First, outside, inside, last. All right, and again, this is getting you ahead for Algebra 1 because you learned this in Algebra 1. So now we combine our like terms in the middle, and we get x squared minus 3x minus 18. Okay, and we've multiplied. All right, so just use FOIL. Don't even worry about distributive property for the binomials. All right, now we have our special one. Now the special one, when it's squared, that means that I'm multiplying the binomial by itself. Okay, that means if it was duplicated, if I just wanted to write it a second time, I could still do FOIL. But if you understand that it's special, meaning it's squared, there's a faster way to solve it. Okay, and that means you just square the first term. So 4x, if I were to square that, I would get 16x squared. Then you multiply the two terms together and you double them. So 4x times y would be 4xy. And when you double it, you get 8xy. Okay, because you're just multiplying it by 2. All right, then the last step would be to square the last term. Well, that's the easiest of all, plus y squared. Okay, so you'll definitely have some multiplying polynomials on your assignments this week. All right, so that's it for your review. And again, this is the first thing that you watch, and I included all the types of problems that you might see on the review, the quiz, and the test. Just make sure you follow those instructions I gave you, and we'll finish out the year strong. This is the last week. These are your last assignments, unless you have any makeup work to turn into me the week after that. All right, guys. I love you guys, and y'all have a great summer.